Senator McConnell had some of his strongest words against Donald Trump and what he was saying about the election before the riot, when he went on the Senate floor and talked about how we have to finally acknowledge that this election is done and that Joe Biden is the president-elect. He has also told his Republican colleagues that this is a vote of conscience, this vote on impeachment. But 44 Republican senators have voted to end the trial. They did it twice. They did it before the trial even started. And most of them all, as we have discussed, seemed poised to vote not guilty again. So, Rachael Bade, my question to you. You wrote something very interesting and very provocative this morning. You said, effectively, it's not impossible that Mitch McConnell could surprise everybody. He hasn't ruled out voting guilty. I think most people would be shocked if he did. But you're saying there's a chance?
Well, look, if I'm a betting person, if you're a betting person, I definitely wouldn't put any money on this. But I think the reality here is if you talk to Senate Republicans who are very close to McConnell, they will even tell you that they don't know what he's going to do. He hasn't been telling them. He hasn't been signaling which way he's leaning. If you watch him in the trial, he barely moves. He barely blinks. He's got his hands in his laps. He doesn't take notes. And he's just been very quiet. And we know, we said this, we were talking before the show, McConnell, more than any other Republican, wants Trump to be gone. He thinks he's bad for the Republican Party. He accused him of, provoking the January 6th riot, said that in no uncertain terms. McConnell is also 78 years old, and he perhaps is in the twilight of his career, in legacy mode. What does he want to be remembered by? Perhaps this is his moment where he does something that is surprising. And, as somebody who's covered him, if you go read his memoir, he talks very fondly about his idols. Henry Clay, the great compromiser who tried to keep the Union together before the Civil War, a senator who broke with his constituents to support the Civil Rights Act, even when his constituents were pro-segregationists. He talks very fondly of these Republican leaders who, had this vote of conscience at one point or another to take a stand. And so I agree with pretty much every Republican every congressional reporter on the Hill saying that this is very unlikely, but it's just really different from the last impeachment where McConnell was whipping people behind the scenes. You knew how he was going to vote, and he's been very quiet. So we'll just have to see. Right now, we think there are probably going to be about 5 Senate Republicans that vote to convict, but behind the scenes, there are Senate Republicans who are predicting there could be more, and McConnell could be on that list. We just don't know.
And by the way, if there are 5 or 4 Senate Republicans that vote to convict, that will be smashing the record for the most senators of a president's party voting to convict in an impeachment trial. In fact, we never saw it happen once until last year when Mitt Romney voted guilty on one of those counts. But let me ask you, Rachael Scott, the question of, is there anything else they can do? So if the Republicans who have by and large not defended Donald Trump's actions on January 6th, they don't want to vote to convict him in a Senate trial, making the case it's unconstitutional. Is there any sense of any movement to try to do something else, to be on record, censure, something, to say that as an official part of the record that they condemn what he did?
Yeah, well, Senator John Thune today, the number 2 Republican senator, said that he would possibly maybe be open to the idea of censure. I know that is something that Democrats have floated before, and they have to get some agreement on the language, on the idea of the resolution. But at this point, I think it still remains to be seen. And clearly the Republican Party is struggling with their identity going forward, even thinking about to Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, at first placing some of the blame on President Trump for what happened there and then flying to Florida to go meet and have lunch with him just a few days before the trial started. It's clear that they're trying to figure out what to do, and so much of that hinges on what Trump wants to do. And frankly, as you know, John, from covering him so extensively, nobody knows what Trump is going to do until Trump decides that himself. And I think so much of the future of what the Republican Party does, and especially in these moments following this trial, will hinge on what Trump wants to do as well.
All right, well, let's take it to that. Trump's future. We saw a very intriguing article about Nikki Haley in Politico by Tim Alberta. A very long article, gets into some of the very contradictory things Haley has said about Donald Trump over time. But of course, she served in his administration. She has very rarely criticized him, considered a potential presidential candidate, maybe even a leading presidential candidate. And look what she said to Tim Alberta on January 12th, just published today. We need to acknowledge he, Donald Trump, let us, Republicans, down. He went down a path we shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have followed him, and we shouldn't have listened to him, and we can't let that ever happen again. Now, Phil, unclear whether or not Nikki Haley still believes that. Again, this was an interview she did a few weeks ago. But how widespread is that view among Republicans that they cannot listen to Donald Trump, they cannot follow Donald Trump's lead anymore?
You know, the interesting thing, John, is I think if you were to do a silent survey of Republican elected officials, you would find many of them in agreement with Nikki Haley, but you would probably find very few of them willing to say so on the record and by name. And that's because Donald Trump remains the dominant force in the Republican Party. He has widespread support among Republican voters, according to virtually any poll and survey. The question, however, will be what kind of role will Trump have going forward? He's been canceled effectively on social media. He's lost that platform and that ability to speak out hour by hour and inject himself into the news cycle. He has told advisors he's determined to play kind of a kingmaker role in the next election cycle in the 2022 midterms. He, of course, has talked and mused about maybe running for president again in 2024, although many people around him have told me they think that's very unlikely. But nonetheless, he could be a big force. He could also just disappear, and you could see the Republican Party rebuild in his wake. And there's going to be real competition among Haley and many others, dozens of other leaders around the country, governors, senators, members of Congress, even mayors, who are going to want to have a stake in that future.